Welcome to another Swordmaster Publications presentation. My name is Ernie Lawrence. Today we're going to be studying Deuteronomy chapter 24. I know there's a lot of people out there that when they hear about the Bible or they've kind of grown up in a non-Christian environment or an environment where they're just not hearing about God a lot other than in an antagonistic fashion, they're going to hear about how the God of the Old Testament was so mean and heartless, and that he was just violent and he was oppressive and all of these things. And I think Deuteronomy chapter 24 really does a great job in showing just how good God is, even in the Old Testament where people think that he's so harsh. God was harsh against sin, and he still is harsh against sin. But there is also God's love and mercy, and we see a lot of that in the laws that we're going to look at today in Deuteronomy chapter 24. So let's get started. Deuteronomy 24 and verse 1 says, "When a man has taken a wife and married her, and it come to pass that she find no favor in his eyes, because he has found some uncleanness in her, then let him write her a bill of divorcement, and give it in her hand, and send her out of his house. And when she is departed out of his house, she may go and be another man's wife. And if the latter husband hate her, and write her a bill of divorcement, and give it in her hand, and sendeth her out of his house, or if the latter husband die, which took her to be his wife, her former husband, which sent her away, may not take her again to be his wife. After that she is defiled, for that is abomination before Jehovah. And you shall not cause the land to sin, which Jehovah your God has given you for an inheritance." So, in this, we find the law that Moses had given to the Israelite people about divorce. And we, of course, see a lot of this in Matthew 19, where the Pharisees come to Jesus and they talk about, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? And Jesus says, because of the hardness of your hearts, it was allowed under Moses, but I say unto you, except for fornication, that is adultery, if the wife or the husband commits adultery, then you can get divorced. But under the New Testament, it was only limited to that. Here, it's any uncleanness. Now, we've seen other laws where the man cannot divorce his wife for just any reason. There has to be a valid reason. Here, we see that it's limited to any amount of uncleanness. Maybe she is addicted to some kind of a sin, or she's fallen into something that she just struggles with in terms of sin, and she either won't repent of it or whatever, but it's not sufficient to call for her death. Then the man is able to divorce her. So it's not just any reason, but the Pharisees, when they tried to trap Jesus, tried to ask that question: Can you divorce for any reason? And Jesus doesn't actually acknowledge that that's what Moses said. He does say that Moses did allow divorce because of the hardness of your hearts. And so there's a qualification that's given here that is still protective of women, that they can't be divorced for just any reason, but there is a responsibility on her part to remain clean, to keep the law of Moses. And the danger is that if she was straying, that her husband could in fact divorce her, and even in that, she could eventually find someone else and marry again. But the rule here is that if she did that and the second husband either divorced her or died, she couldn't go back to the original husband. This word defiled here is just the idea of her being with another man, and that word defiled that we see in the King James, it carries with it a very powerful negative connotation, but sometimes the word defiled just means that you've been made unclean, or there's kind of a messiness to adult interactions. And so there's a kind of a I don't know, Proverbs talks about drinking out of another man's well kind of thing. And so when we look at this, it's an abomination to God because of the spiritual aspects of it. and when we get into like the books of prophecy, when we start talking about Israel as the wife of God, and how Israel would go off to these other nations, prostituting herself or whatever. There's a lot of that defilement going on, and so that's really where this is going. Is this is establishing through the physical relationship between a man and a woman a foundation to talk about that later in the apocalyptic sense or the prophetic sense of God being married to Israel, and then later Jesus being married to the church. And so that's what this purpose is here is to protect the woman, but give her the responsibility of remaining pure for her husband. All right, then verse 5, it says, "When a man has taken a new wife, he shall not go out to war, neither shall he be charged with any business, but he shall be free at home 1 year, and shall cheer up his wife, which he has taken." So newlyweds, they were relieved of any kind of responsibility that would take him away from her for 1 year, so that he was able to solidify that relationship with her. Again, we see that the woman is being taken care of, that God is providing for her happiness, and really has the woman in mind, because the responsibilities of men can take us away, and the one that's going to suffer the most is the female. And I'm reminded of our own military men, especially the younger ones, where they get married as some kind of I don't even understand it. They get married right before they're about to deploy. Why would you do that? Are you afraid of something? What you're doing is you're setting your new wife up to be under the pressure of loneliness and what that can lead to. The very last thing that I would recommend anybody doing is falling in love and then marrying someone and then leaving immediately. That just makes no sense to me whatsoever, because you put a strain on the relationship. You both are now bound in a way where the distance is killing you. First Corinthians 7 talks about the duties that a husband and wife have towards each other physically, and what you're doing is you're putting an immense strain on the relationship by doing that. And here God acknowledges that and says that if you're a newlywed, you're free from going off to fight for 1 whole year, and any business that would take you away from her for any length of time, you're not bound to do. Your boss can't make you do that. So thought it was a very, obviously it's from God, so it's wise, but just the way that God takes care of women is pretty amazing to me. So let's take a look at verse 6. It says, "No man shall take the nether or upper millstone to pledge, for he takes a man's life to pledge." If someone is taking a loan out and they don't really have all that much to pledge or to put as a kind of collateral for the loan, God's saying you can't take from them. And it's not just this one thing. This is the interesting part about this is an example that can be extrapolated out to the broader idea. But what God is saying is, don't take a man's ability to make money away from him for a loan that he needs, because how is he ever going to pay you back if you take away the means that he has to make the money to pay you back? That just doesn't make any sense. So you can't take, like, for instance, today I need my car to get to work. I drive 30 minutes one way every day to get to work. I can't put my car up as collateral where they would keep it, like put it on a lot somewhere and lock it away until I paid back the loan, because the car's the only way I have to get to the work to make the money to pay back the loan. You can't. It's just not logical to take away a person's ability to make money when they're taking out a loan because they don't have enough money. And so it was pretty logical to me. It's not just applicable to this millstone or whatever. But the implication of the last part of that verse there is that you can't take any means of making money away from a person as the collateral for a loan. So, all right, pretty harsh one here. Verse 7, if a man be found stealing any of his brethren of the children of Israel and makes merchandise of him or sells him, that thief shall die, and you shall put evil away from among you. So, kidnapping for slavery. Again, a lot of people are like, well, the God of the Old Testament was just all about slavery or whatever. No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. The common practice of the time is that when you conquered a people, you would take them as servants in your household. And God provided for them, and he provided them in a very profound way that was unlike any other nation around. And on top of that, he says that if you kidnap any of your own people to sell them into slavery, you are a thief that should be put to death. And we can talk briefly about the slavery here in America during the Civil War era and prior to that. But one of the things that few people are taught in public schools these days or understand is that the people that caught the slaves over in Africa were Africans. They were selling their own people into slavery. It wasn't the Americans or the European traders or whatever that would go out and hunt down Africans and bind them up and put them on the boats. No. The slave trade began with African people capturing other African people from different tribes, maybe even from their own, and selling them to the slave traders to bring over to America. And that's God is absolutely against that. And the idea of bondservant or the servant or the slave in the Old Testament is one of you take care of him or her and you provide for them as if they're a member of your own family. And then when their servitude is done, if they choose to go out from you, you provide enough for them to get started in their own life. And so the picture that a lot of people have of Old Testament slavery is not an accurate picture. So, verse 8. So again, this is just a series of different laws that are found in the book of Deuteronomy. That they're not really necessarily connected. It's just kind of going through and saying, God is saying, people of Israel, this is how you ought to live. So if it seems like we're just kind of jumping around here, that's just the nature of the book of Deuteronomy. It says, take heed in the plague of leprosy, that you observe diligently and do according to all that the priest, the Levite, shall teach you, as I commanded them, so you also shall observe to do. And so here the Deuteronomy connects back to the book of Leviticus and the commands that God has given the Levitical priesthood. And their commands were extensive regarding leprosy. And remember, leprosy isn't the disease that we commonly think of as leprosy. Leprosy here is actually a much broader understanding of different kinds of contagious diseases and whatnot. So it wasn't just the thing where your flesh rots and body parts fall off and stuff like that. It could be any number of infectious diseases that can come about. And so God says, you know what? I've already told the Levitical priest how to deal with it very extensively. You listen to them. They're going to guide you because they have instructions on what to do. And then he says, remember what Jehovah your God did unto Miriam by the way after you were come forth out of Egypt. That's in Numbers chapter 12. Miriam and Aaron had gotten upset with Moses, and were like, you know, why do you get to do all this stuff? Why do you get to be the leader and everything like that? And in rebelling against Moses, who God had chosen, they were essentially rebelling against God. And Miriam was struck with leprosy for 7 days. And so he's reminding them, hey, Miriam, you know the story of Miriam. This was something that she was kind of a celebrity in a sense. And everybody knew who Miriam was and what had happened to her. And so it's a good reminder to them This is, look, they followed protocol, even with Miriam. There's nobody that's exempt. You follow what the Levitical priests say. So, all right. Back to this idea of lending with collateral. Verse 10: When you do lend your brother anything, you should not go into his house to fetch the pledge. So if you're going to lend something and he says, all right, well, I'm going to pledge this thing, you don't go in and forcefully take it. You stand abroad, stand outside, and the man to whom you lend shall bring the pledge outside to you. So it's a voluntary thing. If a guy has set up collateral for a particular loan or exchange, it's not about force. It's about a voluntary exchange. It's about free will and choice here. And again, God is establishing a foundation through the physical law about things that are spiritual. So think about this. God does not force anyone into a relationship with him. He offers salvation. He offers redemption. He communicates. He pleads with us, but he never forces us. And then once we accept that offer and the exchange is made, I submit my entire life to God in a voluntary sense, and submit myself, as Romans 6:16 says, I submit myself to obedience to God and to righteousness, and God saves me. God doesn't force me to stay either. There's nothing of force anywhere in terms of our relationship with God. It's always a voluntary choice. Okay. So then it says, and if the man be poor, thou shalt not sleep with his pledge. In other words, if he's lending you something that is an essential part of his, like he gives you a coat, or he gives you a blanket, or he gives you something that is absolutely necessary to him, you accept it in a kind of a symbolic fashion, but you give it back to him in terms of his practical needs. And so, he says, all right, I'm going to give you, I can give you my coat if you'll let me borrow this thing. And he gives you the coat. Well, really, you're supposed to give it back to him by the end of the day so that he can use his coat, because it's cold at night. And it's a symbolic pledge in that you don't actually keep hold of whatever it is. And I think that goes back to this idea of going into a person's house and taking it by force. If he's pledged a thing to you and you've given it back because he needs it, you don't go in the next day and forcefully remove it from him. Even to the point, if a guy is struggling to pay back a loan, if a guy is pledged a certain thing and he says, I'm a little short this month, I can't pay it back, don't go into his home and forcefully remove what he has dedicated to collateral, because that God, again, is not about force. It's about that voluntary. You need to work it out with him, and he's your brother, you need to work it out in love. So anyway, it says, in any case, you shall deliver him the pledge again when the sun goes down, that he may sleep in his own raiment and bless you, and it shall be righteousness unto you before Jehovah your God. So God says, if you do this thing, if you return the pledge to this guy so that he can use it and sleep in his own clothing, then that is righteousness. That is you being loving and tenderhearted and kind to your own brother. Back to servitude. It is this, again, I like this chapter so much because it really does highlight how God views the idea of the servants, the bondservants during Old Testament times. It says, you shall not oppress a hired servant that is poor and needy, whether he be of your brethren or a stranger that is in your land within your gates. At his day you shall give him his hire, neither shall the sun go down upon it, for he is poor and sets his heart upon it, lest he cry against you unto Jehovah, and it be a sin unto you. So, if you've got a hired servant, he's most likely working for you instead of owning his own business because he can't afford to. And so understand his position. This is kind of talking to bosses here, the people who are in charge. And again, I know we're not under the Old Testament, but there's a lot of wisdom that can be found in the Old Testament. If you're a boss, you might be making all kinds of money, but the people that work for you aren't necessarily making all kinds of money like you are. Most likely, they're not making as much as you are at all, and you need to be empathetic towards their position. Recognize, hey, I get it, you're struggling or whatever. Don't withhold their wages. If they worked, don't withhold their wages from them. A lot of American contract labor is set up so that it protects the worker from the big corporation or whatever, so that they have to pay them for work completed. But just this idea of he's poor and he's setting his heart upon it. He worked all day to get that money because that's what he's feeding his family with. And he says, if you don't give him what he is due, then he's going to cry to God about what's happening. And God's going to say, you sinned by not giving him his labor. You're the one that's causing problems, not the poor man that is complaining, but the rich man, the boss, the owner of the company is the one that's sending here. So again, we see God protecting the servant, the worker, the poor man, the downtrodden. All of that is God's love and mercy and his kindness, both in the Old and the New Testament. Next one, and I'm sure I'd read this before, but for me, somebody who doesn't believe in original sin or a sin nature or total depravity or hereditary depravity of any kind, I read passages like verse 16, and I'm like, yeah. And so they don't stick with me very much. I know they're in there, and I can reference them when I need to, but because of what I already believe about sin and its nature, they're something I tend to kind of gloss over. My go-to verse for talking about hereditary sin and why it's not a thing is in Ezekiel 18 verse 20, because it's very explicit that the son is not guilty of the sins of the father. But that's everything that we read about outside of the first 5 books, the books of Moses, is founded in the books of Moses. There isn't anything that is profoundly new in terms of our understanding of the nature of God. That's why the books of Moses are so powerful. Everything after that is history and prophecy. And so to read this as I'm producing this video is more powerful for me, and it causes me to pause and read and comprehend exactly what God is saying and when he said it. He didn't say it all the way in Ezekiel for the first time. He said it right here in setting up the Israelite nation. The fathers shall not be put to death for the children, neither shall the children be put to the death for the fathers. Every man shall be put to death for his own sin. Fathers are not responsible for the sins of their children. Now, there is some culpability in that the fathers need to raise their children right. There is a responsibility in being the head of a household. And so there is that, but the specific sins that a son may, you might do your very best job as a father, and your son still goes off the rails. And that isn't on you, because the actual sins that a person commits are only to that person. They're only applied to the soul of that person. And so we can't claim that all the way back to Adam, somehow I'm responsible for Adam's sin. That's just not meaningful. It's not found in Scripture anywhere to say that we somehow inherit anything from Adam other than the knowledge that he brought into the world by eating of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's what Adam did that affects all of us, is he brought the knowledge of sin into the world. All of those different things that he learned about by eating of that tree That's what affects us. Not Adam's sin, not his guilt, and he certainly wasn't redesigned because he ate a fruit. A lot of people want to say, well, Adam, before he ate the fruit, was a different person, that somehow something changed fundamentally in him as a human being. The Bible doesn't talk about that. That's absolutely made up. And so Deuteronomy here in chapter 24, verse 16, shows us from the law of Moses, from the very beginning of Israel, that it is indeed the case that every man is only responsible for his own sin. They are not transmitted from generation to generation. Okay? Getting close to the end here. You shall not pervert the judgment of a stranger, nor the fatherless, nor take a widow's raiment to pledge. Again, God is protecting the stranger, the foreigner, the people who are orphans, the widows. He's looking out for the little guy here. You shall not pervert the judgment. That means you don't do like backdoor deals, or you don't provide emotional judgments or judgments that are going to bring you profit or something along those lines. You have to judge righteously, even for people who don't have somebody to advocate for them. A stranger from a different land doesn't have a lot of allies in Israel. An orphan doesn't have parents to advocate for them. And so God is here saying, when you have to make a judgment, don't pervert that judgment. Don't make unrighteous calls against them. I'm watching, and it's going to go bad for you if you do. And he says, the reason for this is you shall remember that you were a bondman. Remember, they were strangers. They were foreigners in Egypt. You were a bondman in Egypt, and Jehovah your God redeemed you from there. Therefore, I command you to do these things. So it's a reminder to them, hey, you were once in that situation. You once were in a position where nobody else was advocating for you. And so I stepped in and I advocated for you, and I freed you, and I got justice for you. You remember that because the person that is standing before you is in dire straits, and they need you to be just with your judgment. He's not saying don't condemn them for wrongs that they've done. They certainly need to face righteous judgment, but don't oppress them. Don't bring harsh judgment against them that is unnecessary or doesn't meet the crime that they've committed. Again, you have this reminding of the Israelites being in bondage in Egypt. You have them, God is saying, you were slaves, and I brought you out, and I made you free. And again, I want to iterate how powerful that is as a message, to say that we were once lost in sin, and that God redeemed us out of that, and adopted us as his children when we were immersed into Christ. And so we should remember always what we were and who brought us out of that into freedom. And then we should always act accordingly. The way that we treat other people is like my discussion that I had last night with Kohler. You can see that video posted up here as well. You know, treating Kohler, somebody I disagree with pretty solidly on a lot of things. The way that I treat him is as important as what I'm saying, what I'm trying to convince him of. And so just remember that we were in bondage and brought out by God. And so we should also not pervert our judgment. We should judge not according to appearance, but righteous judgment, as John 7:24 says. All right, some more of God taking care of those who are in dire straits or are having trouble taking care of themselves. When you cut down your harvest in your field, and has forgotten a sheaf in the field, you shall not go again to fetch it. It shall be for the stranger, that's the foreigner, for the fatherless, that's the orphan, or for the widow, that Jehovah your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. Remember, God is blessing Israel with such great bounty that they become an economic powerhouse in the time of Solomon. They are one of the most powerful nations on the planet in the time of Solomon, such that other leaders are coming to Solomon. And we see this like in the Queen of Sheba and whatnot. So for you to be so stingy that, oh, I left, I need to gather every tiny little speck of grain. No, God has already blessed you. You've got more than enough. Just leave the rest of it. That way that when people are traveling and they're hungry, they don't have any food, or an orphan or a widow, somebody who is incapable of providing for themselves comes along, they have all of this food left out in the fields and on the trees to eat, to sustain themselves. When you beat an olive tree, and it says your olive tree, you shall not go over the boughs again. It shall be for the stranger, for the fatherless, and for the widow. So if they take all the olives off the tree through like a first gathering or whatever, that's it. Just take that and be satisfied with that. Leave anything that grows there afterwards or isn't quite ripe at the time you're doing the harvest. Just leave it. Let somebody else gather it that needs it. When you gather your grapes in the vineyard, don't go glean it afterwards. It shall be for the stranger, for the fatherless, and for the widow. And then he comes back to this once more. And you shall remember that you were a bondman in the land of Egypt. Therefore I command you to do this thing. When you were in Egypt, Israel, you were treated so harshly, so poorly, and they did not take care of you. And I brought you out, and I gave you all of this bounty. Don't be like the Egyptians. Don't be like your oppressors. Don't become the oppressor. That's the ultimate message here that God is trying to teach them over and over and over again with these laws. Don't become like those who oppressed you. What did the Jews do, especially in time of Christ? They became the oppressors. They are spiritually called Egypt because they became the person that God said, don't be like this. It's not just a one-time thing. It's not just a statement where God kind of made an off-passing comment that, hey, you guys are acting like Egypt. It's something that is throughout the Old Testament where God is reminding them over and over and over again, you were oppressed in Egypt, so I want you to treat people this way. I want you to be good towards people because when you were a bondman in Egypt, they were evil towards you. Don't become like the Egyptians over and over and over again. So in the New Testament, when they are spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, that is hearkening back to every bit of the Old Testament where God was telling them that. It's just, I don't know, it stands right out to me. Maybe it's because of years of study with my dad and with my brothers and whatnot that it's obvious to me, but I think too many people miss it. And I honestly think it's because too many people just don't study the Old Testament. It's so powerful. It's so important to study the Old Testament. Anyway, a great chapter. I love this chapter because of what it shows about God, the truth that it shows about God, and also the truths that it has in there for us in understanding God and sin and how we're to treat other people, even in the Old Testament. It's just very powerful to me. So I hope you've enjoyed it the way that I have. If you have any questions or comments, please ask. I always enjoy hearing those and discussing the Bible. But that kind of wraps it up for Deuteronomy chapter 24. My name is Ernie Lawrence, and this has been another Swordmaster Publications presentation.